Mhm.
Okay. Shalom, Erev Tov, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening as we are kicking off this three-part series with Rachel Korazim, who's joining from Yafo. Is that right? From your home in Yafo?
That is
Um,
correct.
Thank you so much for being our teacher during these extremely difficult times, helping us feel more connected to Israel and to the current situation. And just want to say a few words of introduction about Rachel and a little bit about what we're going to be doing this evening. I like to call not only me, but I've seen this as well. Rachel is a master educator, which means she is one of the greats, one of the great teachers and a teacher of teachers. And I had the privilege of learning with you a few times, once on a tour of Yad Vashem with a teen group that I was leading many years ago. But most recently, this past summer at the Hartman Institute, where you are a scholar. And it was a class on the poetry of protest in Israel, of various protest movements and the poetry that folks in Israel have written about those times. And um, and so it was a no-brainer to me as we've been living through these last 6 months in the shadow of October 7th, wanting to know what you're going to be teaching and helping us connect and relate to these events. And so we're thrilled that you are putting together very live and sort of dynamic right now, putting this poetry together that Israelis are writing, and we're eager to learn more and connect. Rachel is also a scholar of Holocaust studies and has written a lot of curriculum for Israeli schools on the Holocaust and many other topics. And just to say that we are co-sponsoring this event with Oheb Shalom and Temple Shari Tefillo Israel and B'nai Israel as well. So I'm also glad that we can come together as one community here in New Jersey to learn with you. If you have questions or comments, there will be a few times when Rachel will pause so that we can react to poetry that she is sharing. But I want to invite you to use the comments as well, the chat, I mean, to make a comment or to post a question. And if something is very pressing or needs to be discussed, I will alert her and we'll stop. But feel free to also be reacting in the chat. So that's a great tool for us tonight. Rachel.
Okay, so shalom and thank you, Rachel, Rabbi Madler, and everybody. There are very few people who I know in this audience. I think nobody beyond Rabbi and Merav, which is odd to me. I'm used to speaking to audiences where I know more than one or two people, but that's great to make new friends. That's absolutely fine. So indeed, Mirav told you a little bit about myself. No pressure. All I need is to live up to all her promises, which I will try very hard to do. A few words of introduction, and some maybe logistics. All the material that I will be presenting tonight for us, to me, as for me as well tonight, is available to you. You can get the source sheets that they were made available to you by Mirav, and if you did not get them yet, you can still do that. I don't know, is there a link in the chat to get those? You could put that as well.
I'll post them in the link so that you can have them.
Okay, so that's
Yes.
good. When I'm finished with the three session series in about 2 weeks from today, I will also make my PowerPoint presentation available to those of you who would want to use them to teach and to use in any way. I never hold on to educational material that I develop. I believe that it belongs to all of us. If you happen to want to see all the many poems that I have collected, you can also reach them. I will tell them how to reach me and how to get more of the poems that I keep collecting as they come. And now a word about what we're going to do tonight. So, you know, I first of all, I've been teaching online way before COVID. And when COVID started, I was one of those people who already had a professional Zoom account about a year before COVID. It had been my world. But since COVID started, it became like a tsunami, and you know that yourself. And we are doing stuff on Zoom that we haven't done before. And I honestly, inadvertently, managed to create a Zoom community that had studied Israeli poetry and literature with me since mid-March 2020 to this day and on. At the height of COVID, when we were all sheltering at home, I could have 250, 300 people in a session. And then, thank God, when the vaccinations came and our life went back to normal, it dwindled down to 100, which was fine because we all went back to our lives. And the number of sessions a week went down from four to one, but we still studied. And being in the Jewish world, of course, we don't do sessions in the summer because we try to travel and vacation. And of course, we don't do sessions during the high holidays because we do high holidays. So, like every other Jewish professional, I was getting ready for my new semester to start after the high holidays, namely after Simchat Torah. I had the topic, I had the source sheets, I had even the PowerPoint presentations, everything. And then Simchat Torah came. I was not even at home. I was in Budapest. My husband Yossi and I are connected to the Jewish community and to Hungary in general, and oftentimes we spend the high holidays with friends and family there. And I was in shock and I was devastated and I wasn't sleeping and I didn't know if I was coming and going like most of us, glued to the screens, constantly on the phone, not able to get a flight home because flights were canceled, etc., etc. And in my misery and not sleeping at these very hours in Budapest, on the first Friday, the first Shabbat after October 7th, I was shul hopping at night online. And one of the places I visited was my friend Rabbi Angela Bookdale at Central Synagogue of Manhattan, not that far away from you. And you know well that this is a Reform synagogue, and I hope I'm not offending anybody when saying that knowing Hebrew is not exactly the forte of Reform communities. And yet my friend Angela went to the Bima that night, that Friday, and started her sermon in Hebrew. And she is in New York and I am in Budapest, and she is starting by saying En Milim, no words. And then she continued with her sermon. I was listening. She's a friend of many years. And then somewhere along the sermon, I started inwardly, I couldn't really, but metaphorically, having a conversation with my friend Rabbi Bookdal, which I shared with her much later. She was here at my home with a group to study poetry about 3 weeks ago. And I said, Angela, maybe you do not have words. For sure, I do not have words. But there are other people who do, and they are called poets. And I'm going to go out there and look for them because I need the words, you need the words, we all do. So, oddly enough, a person like myself who is pretty much at home in Israeli literature needed that push from a friend in New York to push me to start this work because I really didn't know what I was doing. And I started by telling my audience, we are not going to do the program we have planned to do. Let's do poems for our days. And then we did the next week poems for our days, number 2 and 3 and 4. And the semester ended with poems for our days, number 12. Then we took a break and came back 6 weeks ago. And guess what? More poems for our days, and comes Thursday we will do more poems for our days, number 7. I have by now close to 20 different sessions of poems created these very days. Well over 70 that I have collected. We are going to do 6. So this is a choice that I have created for us for the first meeting, and then we will continue. And what characterizes the first meeting is that I brought together more of the poems that were the immediate reaction, like coming in the very early days after October 7th. Okay, let's go there by me putting my PowerPoint presentation online for you, and I hope you will be able to see it well enough. And also, I am hoping Rabbi, are you going by Rachel or Rachel?
You can call me Rachel tonight. That's my new
But
name.
normally people call you a Rachel?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that. So
Okay.
first of all, I need for you to check whether I got all your communities right, all the synagogues. I didn't want to miss
Yes.
anybody.
Well
Yes,
done. You got all our logos.
I am glad I managed to do that. Took a few minutes, but I always make a point of doing that. This way, also, I told you that I'll send you the PowerPoint. It will be yours, the one that will be affected maybe by some of our conversations. So, first of all, I'll start by pulling on the screen the titles of the poems that we are going to read as advertised six out of many, many, many more. And on top of the titles, I'm going to add another bit of information that maybe will look, redundant to you. Like, is it really very important for us to look at the pictures of the people who wrote the poems? Normally, when you study literature, you don't pay attention to exactly what the poet looked like. And oftentimes, maybe you do not know. Why am I doing it? Because in my many, many years, I'm going to be 78 on my next birthday. So I've been at it for many years. I've been teaching your classics like your Bialik and Chernichovskys and Altermas and Dalia Rabikovic and all the way to modern poetry. And they are all very well-known people and distinguished. And their works are printed in books that you can find in libraries and bookstores. And learned articles and books have been published about them. And when you want to prepare a class or a course, all you need to do is read those many articles and construct your teaching. None of that was available to me. Most of these people have never published a book yet. No learned articles have been written about them yet. You cannot buy their work in bookstores. I found them all in the digital media. I found them on Facebook. I found them in other modes. I found them sometimes sent to me in WhatsApp or whatever. I can find them in literary supplements of daily papers for Shabbat. And most of them I did not know from before. And I am a person who sort of prides herself for knowing Israeli poets. Because all these people, they have professions. They do not even necessarily think of themselves as poets. So this is why I wanted for you to have the pictures, because they have two additional characteristics that are important. I cannot read learned articles about them, but I can reach all of them. And I did. And I can talk to them. And I can invite them to join my classes on Zoom. So that is a totally different learning and teaching experience for me. The other thing is that I needed you with me to see how young they are. The voices we are hearing are voices of a young generation in Israel. And this is probably for most of them a first exposure to the world. Most of the translations that we are using, there are some exceptions, but most are the creation of myself doing the raw translation and two people, one in Newton, Massachusetts, and the other in Palo Alto. And we are working like an online chavruta to create the translations. So let me start by inviting you to look at the first picture at the bottom of the right-hand side corner of my slide, and that is Michael Zatz or Michael Zatz in Hebrew. He's the only one that I knew of all these people because I've been teaching his poetry before. And therefore we were Facebook friends. And I could see his poems immediately. Like, I don't remember if it was October 8th, 9th, or 10th. I was still in Budapest, miserable, not sleeping. And then I saw his poem, the one we will start with, Illusion. And I contacted Michael because I knew him. And I told him what I'm planning to do. And we were commiserating together and being in pain together and being sad together and talking about the totally unbelievable and incomprehensible situation to us. And then Michael said something. He said, but Rachel, but there are things that are constant in life no matter what. And I was waiting, for an inspired, in-depth statement, philosophical or such. And then he said, no matter what, the dog needs to be walked. Now think about that for a moment, because even a child, you can tell, mom is not in the mood for a walk today. But you cannot say that to your dog. The dog needs to be walked. So Michael is walking the dog one of those days very shortly after October 7th in Modi'in, where he lives. And there is where, as he told me, the poem came to him. Modi'in is literally a nothing place, like a larger suburb halfway between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv. Nothing ever happens in Modi'in. It's a very boring place. It has nice schools and nice shopping centers, and it's a good place to raise your children, but that's it. And Michael, who is a lawyer working for a large NGO that deals with people on the autistic spectrum, lives in Modi'in, and he has a dog. And it's 6 a.m. in the morning, and he needs to walk the dog. And this is when the poem, as he said to me, came to him. I always read the Ivrit first and then the English, then we talk about it in English. אחיזת עיניים, מיכאל זץ. מדהים איך הכל נראה זהה גם כשכלום לא נשאר אותו דבר. Illusion by Michael Zatz. Amazing how everything looks unchanged even when nothing remained the same. Those of you who know the haiku Japanese style poetry will recognize the structure of one idea, one notion expressed in a minimal number of words. Oftentimes the way they are positioned on the sheet, the digital sheet or paper is important as well. And this is what we have. One idea, one thought, few words. Normally, I would like to take you into the poem, but this time I want to take you into it through the title, which is also an invitation to look at shortcomings of translation. That will be our motto today, what is lost in translation. Achizat Einayim. My co-translators, Michael and Heather, promised me that the word illusion totally translates Achizat Einayim. And I agree, I have enough English to realize that. But then something is missing. In the term Achizat Einayim, the literal meaning is that somebody is holding your eyes. Ochez ba'einayim. By that, the suggestion of the expression is that you have the feeling that they hold your eyes and make you see in a certain way, which is not necessarily what is. Like a con artist, like a magician. They want to fool with you. The term Achizat Einayim had this extra notion beyond illusion that something is not as it is. Because indeed, if you come to Israel these weeks, and if you do not happen to live around the Gaza Strip with your home destroyed, if you didn't have a kid in the Nova Festival or were there yourself, if you were not evacuated, if none of your family is in Gaza or God forbid was killed in fighting, then indeed Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim look the same. People are in coffee shops and there is traffic jams and we pay our taxes. But it is an illusion. It's an achizat einayim. Something basically had changed. I could equate that maybe in your experiences to something that happens when you lose somebody who is very close to you. Be it a parent, a spouse, or God forbid, a child. And when you go through what one needs to go through, the funeral and the shiva and so on, comes the day when it's time to get up and go back to life. And you step out in the street and the sun rose and people are in coffee shops and people go about their business and you don't get it, how that is even possible when your mom had died. Take that feeling of not understanding how the world can go on doing its business when you have suffered such a loss and multiply it 10 million fold And this is what you have in Israel. Most of us do not understand how this is possible, but this is the reality we live in. And one of the major changes occurred to our language. And this will be our second poem. And here I will stray from what I have just promised you that I do, first Ivrit, then English. And I will start with the title of the English before I go to the Hebrew, just the title. Homefront Command New Regulations for Small Talk. Why am I starting with the title? Because I need for all of you to absolutely 100% understand that this is tongue-in-cheek, that this is an ironic title, that Homefront Command does not really give us regulation about how to talk. So what is the intention to me of the poet Lital Kaplan, who is a social worker by trade? I think what Lital is saying here, well, Homefront Command, you who come on the television 3 times a day in the early days after October 7th, you who are constantly on the radio and on my cell phone with instructions on what to do when the siren sounds and what to do if, God forbid, our house or the neighboring house was hit by a rocket, or do we need to be evacuated, or can we stay at home? Are the kids going to school tomorrow? Can we gather more than 5 people, etc., etc.? You tell us everything. Well, Homefront Command, if you're so smart, will you tell me how to speak? Because I have lost my language. tongue-in-cheek, ironical. הנחיות פיקוד העורף החדשות לשיחות חולין. מה נשמע? בוטל. ובמקומו נשאל, מה נשמת? מה נשבר? מה נשאר? מה קורה נאסר ובמקומו נתהה? מה קורס? מה נקבר? במקום מה שלומך החצוף נגדיר פנים מול חברנו ונשאל, מה מלחמתך? ובמקום התשובה השגורה בשגרה, עליה הוטל וטו חמור שבחמורים, אצלי הכל בסדר, יש להשיב הכל בסדק, והמקפידים בדברי אמת יענו, הכל בשבר, הכל בשבר. Homefront Command's New Regulations for Small Talk by Lital Kaplan. What's up cancelled? Instead use what's shaken up, what's beaten up, what's blown up. What's going on? Banned. Alternatives? What's breaking down? What's forever gone? Instead of the rude, how are you? We must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? And instead of the standard response forbidden by strict veto power, I'm fine, in fact, it is required to say everything cracked, and the truthful ones will answer everything is shattered, everything is shattered. Let me hold your hand metaphorically and lead you through the lines of this, especially through what may be lost in translation. What's up cancelled? True, this is an exact translation, and yet, if you came with me to the Hebrew, and you do not need to speak Hebrew for that, I need for you just to listen. When you ask somebody in Hebrew how they are, like what's up, what you are actually saying is manishma. Can you hear the words? Manishma. And in it, even if you don't have Hebrew, you can hear the shma. Hear. It's about hearing. When we ask what's up, we actually ask our friend, so what's hearing? What are people talking about? What is the sound, the buzz, you know? Manishma. That's your, and sometimes in slang for short, manish even. And Lital Kaplan is taking that word manishma and breaking it up by changing one ending syllable once and then another sample and another. Instead of manishma, what's up, what's hearing, manishmat, what dropped, manishbar, broken, manishar, left over. I'm translating literally, the translated had tried to do something more English. The same happens with what's going on in Hebrew, makore. This time she changes one letter, makores, for something that coming down like shattering into pieces. What's forever gone, the Hebrew is manikbar, again with the sounds. And now we have reached the center of the poem. And oftentimes the center of poems is like a kind of a pivot around which the whole structure is built. So let's listen to it carefully. Instead of the rude, how are you? What happened to make an absolutely mundane, everyday expression, polite expression, like how are you? You meet somebody, you send them an email, you post on their Facebook page, and you go like, how are you? You don't even think about it twice. What needed to happen for a very regular, ordinary, polite expression to become rude? The answer lies again in the sound. When I'm to ask somebody in Hebrew, how are you? I'm asking, Mashlomcha for a man, Mashlomech if I ask a woman. I can now happen to see on my screen the image of Josh, so I'm imagining a conversation with you, Josh, and I'm asking you, Mashlomcha. I have no idea if you speak Hebrew or not, but even if you do not, you can hear in the question the sound, Mashlomcha, the word shalom. So when I'm inquiring, how are you in Hebrew, I'm asking you, are you at peace? Is there peace with you? Mashlomcha. The other possibility of meaning for that, again lying in the same sound, Rachel, mashlomech, there is the word shalom, but there is also the word shalem, whole, together. When I'm asking you how you are in Hebrew, I'm actually asking you, are you together? Are you complete? Are you whole? Now, if you get these two meanings, are you at peace? Are you whole? You will understand how that became rude. Because is there anybody in Israel who is at peace today? Is there anybody who is whole? So, Rachel, you may remember how our conversation started when you so understandingly asked me, is it still weird to ask somebody in Israel, how are you? And I said, yes, here is your answer. And I want to take you even a step further. There was many years ago an amazing woman poet in Israel, and it's okay if you never heard about her, but she's precious for those of us who were raised with Hebrew poetry. The name was Zelda. She did have a last name, but she was so famous and beloved that she's addressed normally only by her first name. She was an ultra-Orthodox Hasidic woman, first cousin to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So therefore her last name, in case you need to know, was Schneerson, just like the Rebbe. And Zelda wrote beautiful poetry, which we are not studying tonight, but one of her poems has for a title the word Shlomi. What does the word Shlomi mean? The word Shlomi is the beginning of an answer. If I was to ask somebody, Mashlomcha, you would tell me, Shlomi, I am, and then you will answer. And the poem that Zelda starts with the word Shlomi, which never stands alone, it doesn't have a meaning, it has a meaning only in the context of a sentence. And I always imagined that she was asked like how she was, and therefore she created the answer in that poem. And Zelda had, unfortunately, only 20 years, but of a very beautiful, loving marriage. Her husband died young, he was a not well man. And whenever I read or teach that poem, I try to imagine that Chaim and Zelda maybe woke up in the morning and Chaim turned to his Zelda, or maybe they were just sipping tea on the porch, it doesn't matter. And Chaim was smiling to Zelda and said, Zelda, ma shlomech? And she answered by looking at him, Shlomi kashor bechut leshlomcha. My well-being is tied by a thread to yours. And isn't that an obvious truth? Aren't we all as happy as the people who are dearest and closest to us are? That sentence, that Zelda answer, appeared on buildings in Jerusalem and other places. This is from the Pelech School in Jerusalem, where a few days after it started, these posters appeared, Shlomenu kashur bechut el shlomchem. Our peace, well-being is connected by a thread to yours, and it's about the hostages. The image of Zelda is normally not on the wall of that school. I added it to the PowerPoint for you to see. Okay? This is the true answer for me from the beginning, from the early days. If anybody asks me how I am, my answer is Shlomi kashur bechut leshlomam. My well-being is connected, tied by a thread to theirs, meaning the hostages. I cannot be well as long as they are there. So therefore, Shlomi kashur bechut leshlomam. Yossi, my beloved, he's not called Chaim, he's called Yossi, is a professor of social work. Poetry is not exactly his favorite thing to do. But the poor guy is married to me, you know, so what can he do? So a few days into it, when we all lack for words, he said, listen, that Zelda thing is way too complicated for me. Is there something simpler? And I said, of course there is. Here is Chaim Gori, also a famous poet, and he said, he was well over 90, in one of his poems that he wrote at that late age. מה שלומך שואלים אותי ברחוב אנשים למיניהם, שלומי כשלום עמי אני משיב להם. How are you? They ask me on the street, all kinds of people. I'm as well as my people, I answered them. Yossi adopted this one. So if you meet the Korazims this day, you will have a Zelda quote from one and the Guri quote from other, because the normal language doesn't work anymore. Let me take you back to the poem to conclude it, and look at the beautiful jewel of translation. Instead of the rude, how are you, you have to say, how were you? Actually, the English responds to the deep meaning of the Hebrew, of how is your peace. How often does this happen in translation? Very rare, if at all. It's just a gift when it does. And instead of the standard response forbidden by strict veto power, I'm fine, in fact, which in Hebrew is beseder. Again, the poet will change just one letter, besedek, cracked, two letters, beshever, shattered, shattered. And now I want you to look at something structural. Look at the instruction words, because remember, Homefront commands new regulations. Cancelled is sort of a legal language. Banned is a little bit police or such. Rude is regular conversation, teachers, parents about how to be. Veto is the political language. And hamakpidim bedivrei emet, the truthful ones, that's halachic language. That's rabbinical language. Takes us back to our sources. So Lital Kaplan had managed in her poem not only to express the fact that our regular communication is shattered, but the fact that it touches all ways of life. The legal, the everyday conversation, the political, the religious, the ritual, everywhere. You have to watch what you say. And you see, Rachel, this is one of the poems that oftentimes create reactions from the audience. So let me check if you have a question about this, or the first one, illusion, or a comment or something that comes to mind as you see it. Let me know by raising your hand. Andrew, is your hand raised? Why don't you
It was.
unmute? Yeah, go ahead.
I saw the word in the second stanza, kibarti. it's that everything is gone or something. But is it connected to kever, a grave?
Yeah, manikbar, what was buried. Of course, the translation didn't get that. It said gone forever. Translators, sometimes they create their own poetry.
So even
Okay.
better, it's that everything has gone to the grave,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
indeed. Indeed. Yeah, I'll have to check out of the PowerPoint in order to see the screens to see if there is anybody who wanted to add something to the conversation. You do not really have to, but just in case.
Josh.
Josh, are you? Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so the achizat einayim, I think of it more as like trickery or deception. Is there
Yeah,
that
yeah.
connotation also, or
Yeah, I said con artists,
con
magicians.
artist? Okay, got it.
Yeah, absolutely, totally trickery. I wanted to write trickery, and the other translations didn't want it, and neither did Michael. We consulted with everybody, so I agreed to the illusion, but I told them that every single time I teach it, I will point out that a level is missing there.
It's a
Okay,
different
because
connotation.
Achizat Naim has that meaning of trickery.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mirav, go ahead.
Not a question, but I think that the achizat einayim also refers to not what is felt or was felt right after the attack, but also kind of what we had before. This illusion of, or achizat einayim, of what a heaven we live in. When
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah, even like the misbeliefs of before. Thank you. Thank you for that. A Anybody else, dear friends? Rachel, do you see anybody? Am I missing?
I don't.
It's
But
not
Jackie
exactly
offers in the chat disillusionment.
for what Mirav had suggested. Yeah,
Yes.
I think I can go with that. Absolutely. Thank you. And let us go back to the PowerPoint for our next poem and a word of introduction about that. So when we go to the next poem, which is the title for which is Kaddish by Asaf Gur, I want to precede it by a few words, introduction, maybe warning. There'll be a lot of anger at God in this poem. There will be calling God accountable. And there are people oftentimes in my audiences who may be disturbed by that, who think that this should not happen, that people should not speak like that this is sacrilegious, and so on and so forth. So, to everybody who has these feelings, I would like to say that calling God accountable, being angry at God, is a solid ancient Jewish tradition. And it starts with Abraham and takes you all the way through the prophets to Job, and then out of biblical times all the way to Bialik at the beginning of the 20th century, when after the pogrom in Kishinev, he doubts the existence of God, heavens, if there is a God in you, etc., etc., and I haven't found him. So Asaf Gur, when he creates this poem, he stands on very, very solid shoulders. It is done. It is acceptable. We have always done it. Hebrew first, then the English Kaddish by Asaf Gur. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ואף אחד לא בא. כמה אלפים קראו לו בשבת בבוקר, זעקו את שמו, התחננו בדמעות שרק יבוא, אבל הוא שבת מכל מלאכתו. שום אלוהים לא הגיע, ושום אלוהים לא הרגיע, ורק השטן חגג בלי הפרעה, מפזז בין הקיבוצים למסיבת טבח, וכתבנו מוסיף ומדווח, ובין לבין גם מתייפח, שיש תינוק שרוף, ויש תינוק חטוף, ויש תינוק יתום, ויש תינוק בן יום, מוטל מחובר בחבל הטבור לגופת אמו, ולא הספיק אפילו לגלות מה שמו, ומה יירשם על המצבה הקטנטנה עם תאריך אחד ללידה ופטירה. There is a second part, but I'd like to do it slide by slide, Hebrew and English. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, and no one came. Many thousands called him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, begging him with tears just to come, but he ceased from all his work. No God came and no God can't. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted dancing between the kibbutzim and the slaughter festival. And our correspondent goes on to report, and all the while sobbing, saying there is a burnt baby, and there is an abducted baby, and there is an orphaned baby, and there is a day-old baby still linked to his mother by body by the umbilical cord. He hasn't even managed to find out his name. What will be inscribed on the tiny headstone with a single date for birth and death? We'll take this slowly. You can see that I'm one of the translators here, and we all three had agreed, and so did Asaf when we shared it with him, not to translate the first line. To leave the opening line of the Kaddish intact, just transliterated, assuming that our audiences, mainly Jewish, will recognize and need no help in figuring that one out. And when rarely I have people who do not, we are here to help. Once we have made that decision to leave the Yitgadal v'Yitkadash me Rabbah in the original form, then when the next line comes, we pay a price. Because the translation will say Yitgadal v'Yitkadash me Rabbah and no one came. Look at the Hebrew. Yitgadal v'Yitkadash me Rabbah ve'af echad lo ba. Rabbah, the exalted one, the great one, lo ba, didn't come. The sound in itself, knocking one against the other. Rabbah, you, lo ba, you didn't come. Many thousands called him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, begging with tears just for him to come, but he ceased from all his work. So that is the problem, God? This is why you didn't come? Because you don't work on Shabbat? So we should have called Hamas and tell them to come on Monday, or what? But how much stronger is the pain when the words Shabbat and ceased in Hebrew are the same word. Actually, the name of the Sabbath, Shabbat, comes from the fact that he Shavat, Mikol Melachto. So for the Hebrew reader is just playing on the same word, like how could you? What kind of a God? What is this? What do you mean you cease from all your work? And then the poem continues, but no God came and no God can, only Satan celebrated uninterrupted. So look at what is happening. We have a threefold repetition. No one, no God again. Just like the Shema when we repeat for stress, just like the Kadosh Kadosh that we repeat for prayer. Asaf is actually using a ritual structure. The threefold repetition to make sure that a statement is created. But by having created this reality in which God is not there, he ties himself to post-Holocaust poetry, in which poets, philosophers, dealt with the inability to reconcile the coexistence of God and Auschwitz with the notion of hester panim, the concealment of the face. Since it's not possible to have Auschwitz and God in the same universe at the same time, he must have been absent by concealing the face. And I think Asaf is doing the same. No one, echad, and no one, and no God, and no God. So what happens? What's the result? If you are not there, there is no void. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted. Once the divine is out, the one who is to interrupt Satan, it becomes that other realm, the Sitra Achra, the other one. He is now there, and he is uninterrupted. Dancing between kibbutzim and the slaughter festival. For Hebrew speakers, note that the word in Hebrew for Mesibat Tevach is one letter away from the true name of Mesibat Teva, which is how we call these nature festivals. We call them Mesibat Teva. You just needed to change one letter and it becomes a slaughter festival. And our correspondent goes on to report, you've paid attention to the fact that I did not tell you what Asaf Gur's profession was, unlike the two previous poets, because I didn't need to. He put himself in the poem. He's a journalist. He is the correspondent that reports while sobbing. And then he creates this, saying there is a burnt baby, an abducted baby, an orphaned baby, and a day-old baby. And this is juxtaposed exactly with the absence of the divine. If you are not, this is what is. They cannot coexist, but once the divine is pulled out, it becomes the realm of Satan. Bevakasha. This is what is. And with that is, we go to the next page. Note the graphics that you can find in Israel on t-shirts, on posters, on stickers all over. Shiv'a be'October. You do not need to know Hebrew to understand that this is the date, October 7th. Let's read and I'll address myself to it. כך נראה הקיבוץ אחרי ביקור השטן מחזיר את השידור לאולפן. עכשיו שקט יורים, יש גם שיגורים ואין ממשלה ואין רחמים, ורק הצרחות והתמונות לא יצאו לעולם מהראש, 7 באוקטובר 2023. This is what the kibbutz looks like after Satan's visit, turning the broadcast back to the studio. Quiet now, they are shooting, they are also launching rockets, and there is no government, and there is no mercy, just the screaming and the pictures that will never leave the mind. The 7th of October 2023. Two things are lost here because of the translation. One is the rhyme. In Hebrew, will never leave the mind. Rosh rhymes with 2023, shalosh. So we lose some rhyme, not so bad. But the other thing we lose is different. When you talk about the events that happened in English, you will say October 7th, and that's fine. But when we talk about it in Hebrew, we'll say Shiv'a be'October. And by that, every single time you mention the date, you actually say Shiva. Morning, Shiva. The Hebrew carries the meaning of the disaster, the meaning of the loss in the mere date. Just like the word Shabbat is connected to Shabbat. Shabbat is not Saturday. Shiv'a be'October is not the 7th of October. There are differences between the two. Achizat Enaim, like there are those slight differences that carry the meaning here. I would like to do one more and then open it out to conversation, unless there is something urgent. If there is anything, let me know. And if not, I'd like to invite you to a different pedagogy. You know, we teachers occasionally like to vary and do things slightly differently. So this time what I'm going to offer you is the following. I will read the poem, Hebrew and English, as I've done so far. But I will offer no comments, no commentary. Instead of that, I will tell you 3 facts, loosely connected to the poem. And then we'll read the poem again, and hopefully magic will happen, and you will not need any further commentary from me. And if you do, I'm still here, but I think you will not. So let's go with Adi Blechman Sofer's poem. בארי, עוד מעט יגיע החורף. עננים בוכים ישקו את האדמה ויצמיחו מרבדים אדומים. תחילה תפרח הכלנית ואף אחד לא יבוא לצפות ביופייה. אחריה תפרח הנורית ולא יתקיים פסטיבל. ולבסוף יפרח הפרג ושקט אין איש. הפרחים המוגנים נקטפו כבר בסתיו. We are going to the English. בערי בידי בלחמן סופר. Soon winter will be here. Weeping clouds will water the earth, making red carpets grow. The anemone will flower first, yet no one will come to admire its beauty. The buttercup will bloom next, and there will be no festival. The poppy will flower last in silence, seen by none. The protected flowers had already been picked in the fall. No commentary, storytelling. Fact number 1. The notion of poppy fields being a metaphor for fallen soldiers was not invented by Adi. It is part of Western culture ever since the year 1915, when a Canadian soldier doctor, mind you, poet, John McCree, had created in 1915 the poem In Flanders Fields, where he himself fell in battle not long after that. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scare heard among the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago we lived, fell dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. So that's a given. And wearing stickers of poppies or other red flowers is what we do on the commemoration day for the fallen soldiers, and what Canadians do on Memorial Day, and I think even some Americans on Veteran Day. It has become an accepted symbol. It has become what we say and use, so that is fact number 1. The poppy fields are an accepted metaphor for fallen soldiers. Fact number 2. In Israel, believe it or not, there is a notion that certain flowers are protected, and wildflowers, and we are not allowed to pick them. How did that come about? Back in the early days of the state, which will be the late 40s, beginning of the 50s, I'm a child then. Trust me, I'm telling you from personal experience that one of the most fun things for us to do as children was to go out in the hills near where we lived, and the forest we did not have that many, but the few that we did, etc., and pick flowers, wild flowers, and bring them home. When I'm thinking about it retrospectively from so many years back, I think that, our Holocaust survivor parents, like, what could they really afford for fun activities for us in those years? This was there, and it was near home, and it was affordable, and they could do it, and it was fun, and we did. All of us did. And we brought flowers home, and it was beautiful. And we were so good at it that we managed to destroy a fair amount of Israel's wildflower. So by the late 50s, beginning of the 60s, the Society for Protection of Nature is created in Israel. And they identify a certain number of flowers and declare them protected. And we are not allowed to pick them. And guess what? We teach about it in schools. These posters are in every school and medical institutes and sometimes military bases and even police stations all over. And there are songs and stories about these flowers, and we teach our kids from young age, and we all know not to touch the protected wild flowers. So much so that when in the 90s we were expecting the large wave of immigration from the former Soviet Union, I was still working for the Department of Education of the Jewish Agency, and I personally, not alone, but personally, was involved in creating the lesson plans for the Hebrew classes for the immigrants back in Russia before they came, to teach them about the protected wildflowers. God forbid they should behave as back in Russia, go out in the fields, pick the flowers, and nice, not so polite Israelis will yell at them, because how else would they teach them, right? Now, let me tell you something. In the whole history of Israel, there are many things that we tried to teach our public to do, like big campaigns, educational campaigns. Of all the ones I remember, this is probably the successful one. We still have a long way to go before we teach Israelis to stand in line properly. About not littering, we are getting better, but not that great. And living in Tel Aviv, I still complain about people who leave their cigarette butts on the beach. And you even have signs on the beach in Tel Aviv that say, I'm a beach, not an ashtray. Not very helpful, but we try. But this, total success. Nobody touches the flowers. That was the second fact. Fact number 3 coming up right away. There's another thing in Israel called Darom Adom, Chag HaKalaniyot B'tzfon HaNegev, Red South, the festival of anemones in the northern Negev. This very time of the year between Hanukkah and Pesach, the area just around the Gaza Strip, where all those kibbutzim and moshavim who were so badly hit, where they are, you have an amazing, these are all true pictures taken there, flowering of anemones, buttercups, etc. And we have activities, and we have a festival called the Romadom, Red South, and we picnic, and we have all sorts of fun stuff for kids to do. And guess what? We don't touch the flowers. Can you think of anybody in Israel in their right mind who will use the term the Romadom these days when they want to talk about flowers? I don't think so. So now that you know these 3 facts, let's go back to the poem and read it again and see if a curtain lifted up to reveal more meanings than before. I'm going just for the English. Soon winter will be here. Weeping clouds will water the earth, making red carpets grow. The anemone will flower first, yet no one will come to admire its beauty. The buttercup will bloom next, and there will be no festival. The poppy will flower last in silence seen by none. The protected flowers had already been picked in the fall. And let me just show you how Adi, the poet, had managed to combine the 3 notions that we spoke about: the carpets of red poppies, the festival of Red South, and the notion of protected flowers. And I want you to know, to be aware of the fact that this was written very early after October 7th, way, way, way before the beginning of the flowering season. Adi could already see it in her mind, how it will not be the same this year. Okay, let me double check again if there is anybody who would like to offer a question, a comment about the 2 poems that we have seen now before we continue. Kaddish and Be'eri. Yes, Josh, I see that you unmuted yourself. Is that because you wanted to
Yeah,
say something? Yeah.
when you used the word Shabbat and I think the prior one, you said when God disappears, God ne'elam, Elohim ne'elam. So it's also Hu Shabbat, maybe God was on strike rather than just ceased. That the horror
Does
of it
it
all
make
may
it
go.
any better for you?
No,
If it,
but it's a different. It's more like God purposely disappeared rather than just be absent.
that appears in the poetry of Osnat Eldar that we will get to know in one of the next times that we meet, that she talks more about the notion of willingly not wanting to see or hear. Yeah, it comes up in other poems. Thank you for that. Anybody else on this or the previous one, the Kaddish or Be'eri? If not, let's tackle the 2 last ones for today, and then we will open it up for more. So, for the next poem, I have to lead you again through, there is of course some graphic arts that speaks to the same notion. And now I want to take you to a notion that I call the multi-generational Israeli lie. Now, this is not an accepted notion. This is a Rachel Korazim invented thing, and yet. When I say the multi-generational Israeli lie, what I mean is how I was raised by my Holocaust survivor parents who told me that by the time I grow up, for sure, they will be done with wars and such. And then came my turn to raise my children, and I totally promised them that by the time they grow up, there will be no wars and no military. And I trust that they've done the same for their own. I now have only 2 grandchildren in the military. Let's see what happens next. So a few quotes from famous Israeli lyrics and songs. My child, when you grow up, there will be no more wars, so that you can live with love. Mothers will never worry again. Then I took a deep breath, smiled, and told me he had nothing to worry about. He had nothing to worry about, because when he grew up, there will be no more wars. When we were born, the elders blessed us with teary eyes. They said, these kids, God willing, will not go into the army. This is from a famous song that was created about the children of the parents who came back from the war of 1973, the Yom Kippur War, and it's still valid. In that vein, we are going to look at the poem called Mom is Always Right, where our poet Itai Lev is putting the notion of what I just called the intergenerational lie, because I trust he had raised his children in the same way. So oftentimes when you teach poetry, you talk about the point of view or the poetic voice. So in this case, the poetic voice, the point of view is a child. אמא תמיד צודקת. אמא אמרה שעד שאגדל כבר לא יהיה צבא, אמא צדקה. עוד לא גדלתי וכבר לא היה צבא. הוא לא היה כששמעתי צעקות בחוץ. הוא לא היה כשראיתי את אבא כל כך מפוחד ולחוץ. הוא לא היה כשדלת הבית נפרצה בבעיטה. הוא לא היה כשהתחבאתי מתחת למיטה. הוא לא היה כשהדפנו שלושתנו את דלת הממ"ד. הוא לא היה כשהזמן פשוט עמד. הוא לא היה כשהם נכנסו פתאום פנימה. הוא לא היה כשהם קראו את אבא מאמא. אמא אמרה שעד שאגדל כבר לא יהיה צבא, אמא צדקה. ועכשיו רק רציתי להגיד לה שהיא תמיד צודקת, בכיתי, צעקתי, והיא עדיין שותקת. English. Mom is always right. Mom said when I grew up there would be no army. Mom was right. I haven't yet grown up and already there was no army. It wasn't there when I heard the screaming outside. It wasn't there when I saw Dad so scared and stressed. It wasn't there when the door was kicked in. It wasn't there when I hid under the bed. It wasn't there when we 3 pushed back on the door of the safe room. It wasn't there when time just stood still. It wasn't there when they suddenly entered. It wasn't there when they tore Dad of Mom. Mom had said that when I grew up there would be no army. Mom was right. Now all I want is to tell her that she is always right. I cried, I screamed, and still she is silent. So you can see that holding someone accountable is not always addressed at God. There is inner critique about the government, about the IDF, about the military. And let it be very clear. My generation, raised by Holocaust survivors and continuing the word to the next generation, we never expected, neither did our parents, the survivors, expect for things to be easy. We never expected not to have to fight for safety and security. That too was part of the deal. What was not part of the deal is feeling defenseless. What was not part of the deal is feeling totally helpless, with no arms, with no tools, with the IDF not there, hiding, being raped, being mutilated. That was not part of the deal. We expected to fight, to stand up for to our own, but not to be so helpless, so abandoned, so like, at least on the first day, in those horrible days of the Holocaust. What I've left for the end for you is a poem called Yom Tov, A Good Day by Tal Shavit. And here, for the sake of brevity and to leave some time for conversation, I will go only with the English. And I want you to note, and you will yourself, the difference in tone between the first slide, which is the first part of the poem, and the second one. And this will be what will lead us into our concluding remarks today. Good day. I want to manage all the war rooms, mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the children, of all the single mothers and those who are gone. I want to turn myself into protective vests for all the fighters, become iron domes over the heads of all the girls, each and every one, to sustain all the families, to the evacuated, the broken, the crushed, return those who were taken, bring back all that is gone. I want to collect all the donations and take them where they belong, to pass all the messages, to make all the sandwiches, to oversee all the efforts. You can feel that which is in us all the time, like where to run, what to do, where to be active, where to volunteer. So she truly reflects that. And then, but on a good day, I manage sometimes to breathe, sometimes to drink, sometimes to call loved ones. On a good day, I manage sometimes to cry. And I think you do not need me to tell you how this poem totally reflects the difference between the need to do, contribute and volunteer and demonstrate and whatever, and the difficulty of self-care, the difficulty of handling the one breath and the sip of water and crying. And oftentimes I hear people talking about us Israelis and as if we are in a post-trauma, PTSD, etc. And at a certain point, sometimes I want to tell them I wish, but the post is not yet here. We are still within the trauma. There are still 134 hostages. The evacuated are still not at home. There are thousands of wounded ones. Soldiers are being killed every day. Families are suffering bereavement. We're still within the trauma. And it is very hard for us yet to find the time for a deep breath, for a sip of water, for a gentle conversation, and for crying. That will take some more time. So this is the first session, and we are looking at 2 more in weeks to come. I am more or less done with my remarks for today, but I will entertain any questions or comments that you may have at this point. Yes, Mindy? Yeah.
I just wonder, have you heard from Americans, from us, what our reaction was or is?
Of course I have. But I don't teach American poetry. I teach Israeli poetry. Of course, I'm out there all the time. People even send me poems from America. But I'm a teacher of Israeli Hebrew poetry, and I
No,
focus on ours. Yeah. Of
I'm
course,
not questioning that.
if I know about anti-Semitism, if I know about the rallies, if I know about you, yeah, of course I do.
It's not the rallies, it's the heartbreak that we felt on that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. People share that with me, but thank you for doing the same. Thank you, Mindy.
Andy. Oh, gotta unmute. Andy.
You have to unmute, Andy. We cannot
That's
hear
right.
you.
How about now? Good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for our synagogue prayer group, when we hear the Yom Tov, it's a religious holiday almost. And we're doing something that's righteous. And so on a good day, it's like doing tzedek.
Yeah, that's a way of reading it. I agree. She's of course playing on the notion of Yamim Tovim Yom Tov.
Yeah,
It will be a holiday when she will be able to cry.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Josh, again, please go ahead.
Yeah, there was a word mifazez. It was translated as dancing. I don't know that word. Is that something
Yeah,
from
it's
Tanakh,
more
or
or
what
less.
is it?
I
Does it have
think
a different connotation from regular dancing? Or
it is an element of jumpiness in it. I think, but it's basically dancing, a little bit frantically dancing, maybe. Yeah. I will look it up again and see if I can find additional words for it.
thank you.
But thank you.
And also, I know there are 2 more weeks. Is it taboo still to talk about any of the suffering in Gaza, or is it
Not
coming
by
yet?
me, but I don't have poetry yet from Gaza. I started to collect, and I start having, in my teaching during the COVID years and before, I have taught poetry of Arab Israeli citizens. And I have reached out to them and asked them if they were writing these days. And most, even my closest friends here in Jaffa, said they are, but they are not sharing because they are afraid to publish. One sent me one. It's a very long one. I did not include it in your collection, but if you write to me, here comes the key. It's very easy to get in touch with me directly. If you want to go on my website to see the many recorded lectures,
I have it.
etc.,
I have your website already.
you have my website.
I'm a fan, yeah.
So on my website, you have my email as well,
Okay.
but it's easy. It's korazim@gmail.com, just my last name at gmail.com. Write to me for the Arab poetry. I will send you. It's a very long one. I have the Arabic, I have the Hebrew. It's also on the Hartman webpage as well,
Ah,
that
okay.
poem. But I can share it with you. So, and I continue collecting. I don't know that I will be ready with those and translations for our 2 weeks, but it's coming. And it's not taboo by me to speak about the suffering in Gaza, not at all. Yeah. Anybody else?
I wanted to share one half thought. Oh, with Lorraine, you first, and then I'll say the last thing.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion of Hebrew poetry. To follow up on what Josh just said, I wonder, other than having poetry by Israeli Arabs or Arabs from Gaza, if there's poetry in Hebrew by Israeli poets who talk about the common humanity and suffering.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is plenty. I'll double check again in the collections that I have sent you, and if it's not there, I will add one or two. Absolutely. And very critical. Actually, there is one now in the process of being translated. And if it is ready before we are, actually, I think it is that it's in my mail already. Yes, there is. The answer is yes, and I will try to include it in one of the upcoming sessions. Yeah, and thank you for reminding me. Rachel, it would be good if you write me an email and remind me that I promised that, because you know it's like 3:17 p.m. a.m.
AM.
and I'm not sure I will remember.
I will. I'll write to you so that can be shared.
Email me, and when I get up, I'll be able to take care of this. I will. And thank you for the and you wanted your comment,
Oh,
Rachel.
I was going to say that the poem that brought me to the most tears, and I think was very emotional for a lot of us, was the one about sort of the broken promise, the fact that mothers have said there is no army, and there really was no army, and
Mom is
sort of
always right.
mom
Yeah.
was always right, and the notion of this was not part of the deal, that that the army and the state is supposed to protect the people, and just reminded me of Natan Alterman and the Silver Platter, that is sort of the deal of Israel. That is the agreement that parents kind of give their young people, so that we can receive the state on a silver platter, and they provide the security and the defense. And now a new contract, that contract feels very broken, and what new contract is being written in a sense, alive and well, no answers yet, but just reminded me sort of in conversation with that poem.
Well, you are not the only one that was reminded of that, because as every Jewish conversation is intergenerational, a few weeks ago a poem have appeared. I do have it translated already. I have taught it already by Eli Eliyahu, and it is called No Platter Nor Silver. And it's in conversation with the original promise and the situation where we are. If you put it in the email, I'll send it to you. I can send you the whole collection. I mean, it's no big deal. I keep collecting them. Anybody who wants can have it. Yeah, I have
Thank
as
you.
long as you don't publish it, for money, then it's okay. If you just share it in shul or with friends.
Rabbi
Yeah.
Marder, are you going to how will we get the
Yes.
material?
So I've emailed the Bethel members here tonight, all 3 collections for the 3 sessions, and I'll get to the other synagogues as well. I'll send that out tomorrow. And these additional poems, if they're not in there, I'll touch base with Rachel and send them out to the whole group.
Yeah, well, I can just simply send you the whole collection of the
Great.
70 poems. That would be the easiest for me. And then you will see everything that is coming in that. Okay?
Great. So I'll write to you to get that and share out with everyone who RSVP'd, registered.
Yossi.
Toda Rabba, and thank you especially
Exactly.
for the late night and
That's
for
okay. That's okay.
for sharing
The
this with
talk is
us.
more important.
Israeli poets have always been the heroes and the prophets of Israel, and they continue to be. Thank you for sharing their wisdom with us, and looking forward to next week.
Okay, until we meet again. Toda rabba. Bye-bye.
Laila
Have a
Tov.
wonderful evening.
Thanks for staying up so late.
Yeah, it's actually early now.
Boker Tov, we should say. Yeah.
Bye.